Well, John, thank you so much for coming back to join us. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to China and persecution. I think the big question for those who don't know, and many people don't, how would you describe the atheist ideology that dominates the Chinese government structure?
Well, Chinese, is governed by the Communist Party. It's controlled by the Communist Party, and the official ideology calls for the state to work to achieve the withering away of religion. Full stop. Like religion has no place in the ideology, and they use the state to work against religion. But having said that, the Chinese these days are pretty pragmatic, and they're concerned about power, and sometimes they uh, turn on the persecution against religion. They will have anti religious campaigns. Other times they back off and take it easy. But that is still the official ideology. And it's very clear that they haven't departed from it. From their point of view, the Communist Party is like God. There is no other God. There's a Communist Party that manages and controls everything, and the state is used by the party to exert that control. So it's a totalitarian system. However, they are pragmatic, like they want to make money. They want to. They don't want to. Be as they were in the time of the Cultural Revolution, where there was just madness and the country gets poorer and poorer and can't compete with the rest of the world. So there's an element of pragmatism, as there was in the Soviet Union.
As you're describing that, I'm thinking of stories that I've covered where I've seen artificial intelligence and all these technologies being used. And again, some of these stories are hard to pin down and they're hard to verify when it comes to China. But obviously at CSI, you're hearing stories, I'm sure, of people on the ground. You have a little bit more of an idea of what is happening there. How is China using AI and modern surveillance to push people into conformity, but not just that, to discourage specifically Christianity?
Okay, well, I mean, one of the stories that is floating around now has to do with the Chinese version of the Bible created by AI. I haven't yet seen it. It may be happening. One can't deny it, but I haven't seen the evidence of that. But just set that aside from it, that particular case. There's no question that the Chinese authorities use AI and modern means of surveillance to try to politically control the work, the work of the church, and to bring about a demise of religion. Uh, any religion. It can be Islam, it can be traditional religions, it can be Buddhism, it can be Christianity, and they use it to monitor who's doing what. It becomes risky, maybe just simply to go to church just because you're going to be monitored. So they use these kinds of means. Of course, we also have some experience with them in the Western world. It's not unique to China, but there is far less state control, of course, over the use there. And they are used as a matter of policy to work against the church, especially that part of the church that has a prophetic voice in society, that speaks against injustices, that simply is not content to uh, simply have their religious life confined to worship in designated places. So the persecution that you find and the surveillance and all of these kinds of things that are used, they tend to be directed mostly against those believers that believe that the Christian faith is not confined to the church or to their house group or to their certainly their personal life, but they want to be able to express their faith more fully in society.
It's super interesting to me because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I heard recently that people have to register their religion. And so maybe in the 80s, there were a couple million Christians in China, and now it's exploding. I think what I heard was around 200 million Christians, which would surpass the United States. I mean, of course, China's densely populated, it's a huge country. But it makes me think of the fact that when the church exploded in the early New Testament, there was the most intense persecution you can imagine going on, under Roman Empire, etc. So I feel encouraged that people are registering as Christians. I think that's very, very brave to be doing in China. I can't imagine, what they're going through, but I think it just makes me think of the verse in Revelation where it says they overcame them by the blood of the lamb and the power of their testimony, and then the part we always leave off, and they loved not their life unto death. I mean, I'm so proud of Christians who are in these persecuted areas. What are you really seeing as going on to Christians in China? I mean, as a consequence of registering, as a consequence of spreading the gospel.
Right. Well, they have been through these terrible times of persecution. There's no question, especially during the Cultural Revolution, when there was no visible church at all. And, the statistics are that when I was a boy, there were 1 million Christians in China. Today, nobody knows exactly, but people speak about 250,000, maybe even 300,000. Nobody knows. But that is miraculous. It is really, if it, yeah, 200 million, I beg your pardon, million, of course. And that is a miracle when you consider the persecution that there was. We speak about persecution in China today, and Christians are persecuted in China today, but nothing like they were during the Cultural Revolution. Nothing, nothing like it. They have, in relative terms, considerable tolerance. They're tolerated far more because you can have even officially recognized churches. Far more Christians worship in what we call house churches, be they Catholic or Protestant. But there are those who are prepared to be, open and go to these registered churches. And there are problems with them. They tend to be they are state controlled. These
Well, can I ask about that? Because so, if the government gives a pathway for you to be able to come in and have a government registered church, why is it that the majority or more people are like, no, 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 we don't want any part of that. We want to have a house church. What is it about the government structure and what's maybe being taught or the Bible that maybe they're using? We don't know again. That is different from what is driving everybody to those house churches?
Well, they simply don't trust the government. How can they possibly trust the government when not too many decades ago there was this cultural revolution and you simply couldn't be a Christian? You'd be killed. You couldn't own a Bible. You couldn't, you're driven completely underground. Now, the very same party says, now, if you sign up with us, and we can keep you under surveillance and know what you're doing, you can be in a church, and people simply don't trust it, especially when that party still as an atheist party, it still is committed to the demise of religion, the Christian faith, and others. Why should anybody trust that totalitarian government, even during times of toleration? Now, again, things have become a bit worse in the past decade or so, but in relative terms, there still is considerable toleration of Christianity compared to the days when it was just completely banned and you would be killed. You could be sent to re-education centers. You had no chance to survive as a public Christian. That's no longer the case. And you have many really interesting things going on in China. It's such a huge country and diverse. There are some parts of China, one city in particular, where some very wealthy people are Christians. They're known to be Christians. They're so-called boss Christians. They're powers in their community. They're able to deal in a way with the communist authorities to maintain prosperity, keep order in the community. Now, that's not the norm throughout China, but you find the most amazing things. You find that. You also find crosses being torn down off of churches and public buildings. You find, especially the more politically active pastors being put into prison. You find the Catholic bishops who will not join this state, so-called patriotic association, uh, periodically detained, arrested, harassed. So you find all kinds of odd situations in China. It's not a uniform situation, and God is working there in many different ways, and it's hard for us to understand. his ways, but we should be encouraged greatly, I mean, hugely, by the fact that there was this miracle of, again, when I was a young person, this cultural revolution going on, Christianity completely underground, uh, violence being used. And now, if the current trends continue, there will be more Christians within a few years in China than in the United States. It will not be a Christian country in the sense of a majority, but they will be the largest, Christian community in the world, the Chinese Christian community in that country, which is under communist rule. And it's really a fascinating story, and it's a story that is largely a story of Chinese Christians. Yes, there have been missionaries that brought the good news there. There's been support from mission organizations and so on and so forth, but that has been largely a Chinese story, not something that's been imposed on, although the Chinese authorities like to portray Christianity as simply a Western construct, and that the churches are really agents of the imperialistic Western powers and so on. That's part of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda. But the fact is, this revival of great evangelization in China has taken place due to the Chinese Christians themselves figuring out how to do it, being moved by the Holy Spirit, and it's their work, not ours.
Questions, but I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, we talk a lot about on this show about, God moving supernaturally. And when you look at those numbers, it is hard. I want to come back to them. It's hard to look at that and say there's not some supernatural, you use the word miracle, John, to describe it, that you would have that many millions, hundreds of millions potentially of Chinese individuals who have become believers in the midst of this insanity. Um, how have you seen, have there been stories, interactions where you have just had moments as you in your role are seeing what is happening there and you're like, that is definitely God moving. That is supernatural. I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all, but I would imagine you encounter those stories all the time.
Well, of course, there are stories of individuals who've survived, individuals who have passed on the good news, to others under difficult circumstances. But I tend to view it, to look at it in terms of a big picture, like what has happened there. How has China gotten from this horrible persecution to where it is today? And one of the turning points, you say a miracle, it's kind of a political miracle in some ways. The opening up of China was the result of actually President Nixon and Henry Kissinger had a new no, understand. We're going to talk to you. We're going to do business. We want to have trade. And there was kind of an opening up. You can't have a modern economy without a certain amount of freedom. We know that in the capitalist society, you can't have a state controlled, prosperous society. So the Chinese had to open up their society economically, and that created space for cultural pluralism. People could start talking to each other, people could start doing business to each other. That is a kind of a political miracle that it happened, and how God used that. And again, there are just so many stories of individuals. There is Pastor Wang Yi, who's now in prison. Um, but he became a Christian at the time of the Tiananmen Square. He it was a miracle. He didn't come from a kind of Christian background or whatever, and the Lord moved him. And he is now, well, he's in prison now, but he started this house church movement that is very strong with thousands of believers. And you cannot really attribute that to anything other than the work of the Holy Spirit. Um, but also, that happened in the context of an openness. And one of the concerns that I have, of course, is that if relations between China and the United States deteriorate to the point of like a new Cold War or something, China closes up, The Western world is viewed as an enemy. There will not be interaction between the two worlds. One of the ways in which Christianity has spread within China, of course, is through the movement of people. Chinese businessmen coming to the West, Chinese students coming to the West, hearing the good news for the first time, accepting it, going back home, and then spreading it. And again, the Holy Spirit carrying the good news there. And one has to hope and pray that, on the one hand, the United States, of course, resists a totalitarian system. On the other hand, we don't go back to those days in the 1950s and early 60s when China was really closed off from the Western world, and we couldn't have contacts with believers. So there's a careful balancing act that our statesmen have to, perform to make sure that we stand up for religious freedom, that we don't sacrifice that for economic gain or other political considerations, but we try to work with the Chinese so that the society remains as open as it possibly can. Not for trade, yes, we want to do business, we want to have good economic relations, we want to make money in China. That's really the bottom line for our statesmen. But it creates an open door, an open society for people to talk to each other, and that means to share the good news. Share the good news on the internet, share the good news in the cafe, share the good news wherever you can meet with.
I keep thinking of the verse in the Bible that says, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." And I imagine that when someone has grown up under such intense dictatorship and communism, when they experience the freedom of the Holy Spirit, when they experience Jesus, it must just be such a radical change for them. It must be such a radical experience to truly experience how much freedom there is in Jesus. I mean, I think about I talk about this all the time. Like when you really encounter the love of Jesus, truly, not just sitting in church as some sort of social club, but when you truly encounter the love of Jesus, which we can all agree with, like there's nothing like it. It leaves you undone. It wrecks you. It fills you with so much joy and hope and sense of I don't care really what happens to me, even though we do care, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's just I can imagine it being such a radical shift for them to experience that level of freedom when they've experienced so much confinement. And I wonder if that's part of why it's exploding over there. And I also am curious, John, as to whether you've ever been to a church house, a house church, excuse me, in China, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking that would be the coolest experience to actually be able to go and experience church alongside people who are so aware that at any moment they really could lose their life, but yet they're just serving the Lord with everything in them because it's so worth it.
Yeah, I must confess, I haven't been to a house church in China, but I've been to many churches in communist countries and with believers under that kind of system. But yes, there is this freedom that Christ believes, and people, especially when you're denied all freedom, they value that, and that has great currency with them in society. But yeah, uh, the faith is enormous of the Chinese Christians. We have to hope and pray that they remain true to their faith, that we, of course, hope and pray that there are no further waves of persecution. But what we also need to pray about is not just the individual Chinese, say the ordinary Christians, we need to keep them in prayer, but for the leadership of China. Because when we think about our own, say, Western history, church history, Christianity, uh, Europe, became Christian largely because conditions for Christianity opened up enormously when the Emperor Constantine accepted Christ and said, the empire is going to be Christian. And what one has to hope and pray is that leadership in China recognizes that China is better off with Christianity than it is with atheism, that that is better for the country, just like they came to the conclusion actually that a kind of capitalism is better for the economy than traditional communism. They kind of came to that realization at the economic level. We have to hope and pray that they come to the realization that the Chinese nation, that the state is better off opening the door to Christianity, allowing Christianity to fill the cultural and spiritual space in China, and China will be a stronger and better off nation and society for it. Those scales have not fallen from their eyes yet, but we have to hope and pray that they do.
Absolutely. That's such a good call to action for all of us. That makes me think of Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible. You're exactly right. There are many, many times in the Bible where all of a sudden the pagan leader was like, oh, this is the true God. So that's an exciting call to action for us to be praying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, John, as always, we appreciate you joining us today. Where can people go for more on CSI and the wonderful work that you're doing?
Well, of course, to our website, which is www.csi-usa.org. And you can check into CSI that way and get some basic information.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks so much for everything you're doing at your end.